the ball is in the court of Carrie Lam. It's up to her, it's up to her masters, how to handle the Hong Kong people's demands. We are not demanding something that we do not deserve, and we are not changing, like we are not being flip-flops. Our demands are so clear, written on the wall. It's entirely up to her how to respond directly and positively to the Hong Kong people. And Hong Kong people are very determined. We can see that the huge turnout rate in the last election 2 weeks ago.
Right.
We can see that Hong Kong people are still extremely determined even after the landslide, because we know winning seats in the election is not the end of the movement. It's just a new chapter. And we will stay determined and passionate about what we demanded for.
How is the current election system in Hong Kong stacked against the pro-democracy camp? Why is the pro-democracy victory in the recent district council election so significant? How does this play into the selection of Hong Kong's next chief executive? Can Hong Kong chief executive Carrie Lam actually make decisions on her own, or is she completely beholden to Beijing? This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Jekielek. In this episode, we'll sit down with Hong Kong legislator Alvin Yeung, the current leader of the pro-democracy Civic Party, who will break down exactly how the Hong Kong electoral system works and how the 2019 protests unfolded. Alvin Yeung, wonderful to have you on American Thought Leaders.
Thank you.
So Alvin, you are the leader of the Civic Party here in the Legislative Council of Hong Kong, and you've recently, you're introducing, I don't know if you call it articles of impeachment here, like they call it in the States, but you've introduced a motion to impeach the chief executive, Carrie Lam, along with, 24 other people. What's going on here? Tell me about this.
That's correct. Together with our colleagues in the opposition, we moved the motion to impeach Carrie Lam for a simple reason. She's not doing a good job. She failed the Hong Kong people. Basically, over the past 6 months, the unrest, the turmoil, everything came from the mere fact that Carrie Lam made a wrong decision by introducing the very wrong extradition bill. Of course, the bill now has been formally withdrawn, but whatever that is happening in between, that is the chaos, the police brutality, the misgovernance, the fact that Carrie Lam failed to handle all these issues and failed to respond to Hong Kong people directly, and turning a blind eye to thousands and thousands and in fact millions of Hong Kong people taking to the streets. I mean, this Carrie Lam is not capable to stay in her job, so she has to be impeached.
Recently, you've had these unprecedented district council elections where, record numbers of people came out to vote with a strong message saying, supporting the pan-democratic or pro-democracy groups. And I think Carrie Lam said she's going to study that carefully, I believe, something along those lines. How do you feel that is going, or do you feel that that hasn't worked?
Imagine 3 million Hong Kong people cast their vote. We are talking about around 70%, in fact slightly over 70% of turnout rate. Is very amazing in the world standard. And out of this 70% of turnout rate, those people who voted, 57% vote for the opposition. I mean, that's a clear majority. And in the system itself, in the district council elections, there were 452 seats out for grab. And out of this 452, 388 seats went to the opposition. I mean, imagine, that is a landslide. And any sensible person sitting in a government would say, look, I have done a bad job. I understand because people are not happy with me, although the government itself, Carrie Lam doesn't belong to any political party.
Right.
But it's so clear that she worked hand in hand so closely with the pro-Beijing camp political parties, which sent people to run and contest it in the district council elections. And they suffered a huge, huge loss. So basically people treated them together. And we make it so clear before the election that, look, Hong Kong does not have a referendum, but since this is a district council election that everybody can cast their votes,
Right.
why don't we treat it as a de facto referendum regarding what's happening and what has been going on over the past 6 months? If you're happy with the government, of course you can vote for the pro-Beijing camp candidates. If you're not happy with this government, and if you're not happy with how they handled the movement, then of course vote for us, the opposition. And the result is so clear. It's overwhelmingly clear, and it doesn't take much time to really study the results, because the results are already written and loud and clear. People's voice are loud and clear. Learning from what Carrie Lam has been doing and how she handled Hong Kong people's voices and demands, when she says she will study it, that means she's not going to do anything about it.
Okay.
So this is extremely disappointing. In any democratic society, the leader or the one in power would have stepped it down right after the election because of the overwhelmingly results. And not to mention, I have to bring it to the attention of the international audience. Some polls conducted recently suggest that Carrie Lam's approval rate is below 20%.
Wow.
19.7, if I remember correctly. I mean, imagine a leader, head of government, only has 19.7 approval rate. I mean, that's extremely unimaginable.
Right.
And that person should have gone a long time ago.
So this is another very real question. I mean, do you feel Carrie Lam can actually make decisions that Beijing would not want? It's a curious question, because we've been talking with everybody. All the interviews I've done here, people have been telling me very clearly, and this is something we're aware of at the Epoch Times extensively. There's this, the hand of the Chinese Communist Party is behind many of these things that are happening. Can Carrie Lam act independently as a person, make decisions that Beijing wouldn't support?
Well, perhaps not. I mean, we never have direct evidence from the government or from Carrie Lam's office.
Sure.
But we can judge from circumstantial evidence. There's a huge office called the Chinese Liaison Office, located not far away from where we are, just around like 10 minutes driving.
Right.
That is the representative office of Beijing, located right in Hong Kong. I mean, the name suggests that they are here to liaise with people, but it goes way beyond liaison.
Okay.
There are more than clear evidence suggesting that they are behind, number one, elections. Those who want to run on behalf of the pro-Beijing camp, they have to make sure that they get a blessing or endorsement from the CLO. That's number one. Number two, they are behind all major decisions made by Hong Kong government, including the extradition bill.
Right.
We remember back in April or May, before millions of people took to the streets, the Central Liaison Office, their head of office, the director, summoned the pro-Beijing camp people, including those legislators, including those National People's Congress members,
Okay.
to the office and told them, you have to support the government and it got to be passed, the extradition bill. So it's in the news. It's not something so strange to the people.
Right.
So what I'm trying to prove is the mere fact that this Central Liaison Office, their existence is not only about liaison. They go beyond what they are supposed to do. They interfere with Hong Kong domestic issues, including local politics, including legislative business, including what to vote for, whether they should support a bill or not. I mean, this is very disturbing, because that is in complete contradiction and in breach of the one country, two systems spirit. we all understand under one country, two systems. Other than national defense and foreign affairs, these two issues belong to the central government. It's up to Beijing to work on. But the rest should be domestic issues and domestic affairs. And it should be up to Hong Kong people to decide locally. But then, of course, it's not happening. Including elections, we can see footprints from the Central Liaison Office.
Okay. So, what do you think can be accomplished with this impeachment push?
As a minority here at the Legislative Council, we understand that it's almost impossible to pass the impeachment motion. But then it doesn't make us silent. I mean, we have a duty, we have a job to voice out for the people. And especially here at LegCo, this is the best platform for us to have the Chief Secretary, who is the number 2 of the government, here to represent the government, to respond and to defend their own case. And by doing so, we'll find out what are they really thinking in their mind.
Okay.
Of course, it's nonsense to listen to them and find out that they still do not believe they have made a huge mistake. They still believe that they have the mandates from the people. They are still begging for a chance to continue working and serving the Hong Kong people without knowing that this government, Carrie Lam specifically, is the source and the root cause of all these problems.
So I'm wondering if you could give us a quick lesson, okay? Hong Kong democracy, there's some level of democracy here. But it's far from complete. And one of the reasons that, as you call, the opposition is in a minority is something that's kind of, I guess, baked into the system, right? And I'm wondering, could you just kind of give us a thumbnail of that? Because not everyone out there is aware of the details of this.
So, in a nutshell, the Hong Kong Legislative Council are divided into 2 constituencies. One is called the geographical constituency, and one is called the functional constituency.
Okay.
For the geographical, we have 35 seats. And they divided Hong Kong into 5 geographical districts. Say, for example, like where we are right now is the Hong Kong Island district. And this district returned 6 seats to the council.
Right.
And different parts of Hong Kong, subject to the population, the largest district is where I come from, the New Territories East and West. Each of these 2 districts returned 9 seats.
Okay.
And the Kowloon side, they divided into 2 and with 6 and 5 seats. Anyway, so these 5 major districts have different number of legislators. And how do we elect these people? It's not a first past the post system. You have this huge district, and is a proportional representation.
Sure.
And so usually even the Democrats, we enjoy the majority of votes. We do not grab all the seats. It's not a winner takes all sort of idea.
Understand.
So in the geographical, we usually get slightly more than half. And that's how it works. And for the functional constituency, it's a bit interesting. For the 35 functional constituency seats, 5 of them come from the super seats of district council.
Okay.
That is to say, for the prerequisite, you first have to be a district councillor. That is to say, the winners from 2 weeks ago.
Right.
And they can compete among themselves for nomination, and they can put forward themselves and for the rest of Hong Kong people to choose from.
Okay.
And so the winner, they have like thousands and thousands of votes.
Okay.
So 5 of them. Right now, 3 of them came from the opposition and 2 from the pro-Beijing camp. And for the remaining 30, some of them come from different professions. Like the legal sector, we have 1 representative.
Okay.
And only the lawyers can vote for that particular seat.
Interesting.
The accountants, they have 1 seat. The teachers, they have 1 seat. The doctors, they have 1 seat. It sounds all right because it's a one person, one vote sort of thing. But there are also some other sectors that is slightly more interesting. Say, for example, the bankers, they have a seat, but not everybody working in a bank gets a vote. Only the person who has the license of the bank
I see.
gets a vote. So basically, we're talking about around 200 people can vote for the banking seat
I see.
because only 200 odd people in Hong Kong gets the license.
I see.
And for the agriculture and fishing sort of industry, knowing that Hong Kong does not have a very strong and popular agricultural industry, they still have a seat.
Okay.
There's the Chamber of Commerce, they have a seat.
Okay.
So it's not a strictly one person, one vote, because sometimes if you're rich enough, if you have a few companies, then you might have a few more votes.
Okay.
So that's how I would say twisted the system is.
Are you suggesting that those votes are kind of stacked in the favor of the...
Indeed,
Yeah.
because the Central Liaison Office can easily influence in different industries and sectors.
I see.
Usually, if the sector is voted by individuals, say the legal sector, the accountancy sector, the teachers,
Yeah.
it's slightly more easy for people to really express their free will
Okay.
because they can't really control. We're talking about 20,000 lawyers.
Right.
It's not that easy to
Right.
control.
But then this banking sector...
Then it's very easy
Okay.
because there are more than dozens, if not more than a couple of dozens of Chinese-related banks in Hong Kong anyway.
Right.
And so they get their votes.
I see.
So this is how frustrating it could get, because even though in popular votes, the Democrats enjoy over 50%, we are always the majority. But at the legislature, because of this decided system, it doesn't reflect what the society really is.
Okay.
And so the government always enjoys a majority here in the Hong Kong legislature.
Interesting. So, when we have these new LegCo elections next year will be coming, you think there's any possibility, even with this level of mobilization of, let's call it, pro-democracy forces, is there any chance given the current system?
Never say never.
Okay.
In the geographical, although we might not be able to grab all the seats, as I mentioned a bit earlier on the reason behind, but if we manage to stay in the majority, if we manage to grab as many seats as possible, and if we are smart enough to start working on the different functional constituency seats and start working on the voters' registration, I mean, we have more than half a year to do our job.
Okay.
So it's a collective effort. Not one single politician or political party can do the job. It's everybody's effort. And I trust Hong Kong people are very determined to try our best and see whether we could test our limits. Over the past 20 odd years, we had never managed to get a majority here at LegCo. But now when people are so aware of politics,
Right.
when people are so determined for a change, it's always possible to see how far we can get.
Very, very interesting. Let's go back to, you say that Carrie Lam has failed in her mandate, and that the, escalation of these protests basically is a result of what she's done. Can you kind of elucidate that a little bit for our audiences, why you think that?
Okay. So we have to go back a bit of time. Earlier this year, when Carrie Lam first introduced the highly controversial extradition
Right.
bill, people were not entirely aware of what's really going on. And she used a case, a Taiwanese murder case. In fact, 2 Hong Kong citizens traveled to Taiwan, and the boy murdered the girl. And the boy escaped from Taiwan, returned to Hong Kong. And since there's no extradition agreement between the 2 governments,
Right.
the boy was, you may say,
got off free.
You may
right?
say so.
Yeah.
And Carrie Lam said, look, this is unjust. We cannot allow this from happening. We have to send the boy back to Taiwan for trial. I mean, that's justice. That sounds all
Sounds
right.
reasonable. Yeah.
The problem here is extradition is highly sensitive. Hong Kong signs extradition agreement with around 20 jurisdictions. And most of these jurisdictions are common law jurisdictions. They have a reputable rule of law, and they have a transparent legal system, etc.
Yeah.
And in the Hong Kong legislation regarding extradition, there's a very clear clause that bars Hong Kong from having any extradition agreement with China, because it's a historical issue, and of course it's a fact that China doesn't have human right protection, at least not proper ones.
Right.
Their rule of law is far from our level. Basically, nobody can trust the Chinese system, and you cannot feel confident sending any criminals to China for trial. And that was the case before the handover. That has been the case since the handover.
Right.
And since historical reasons, Taiwan is treated as China.
Yes.
And let's not get into that political
Sure.
debate for now. But at least the Hong Kong government said, look, if we have to send somebody to Taiwan, we have to sign the extradition agreement with Taiwan. But we are not allowed from doing so because of this clause.
Understand.
So we have to amend the extradition ordinance.
Oh, this is fascinating. Like I wasn't even aware of this nuance. It's very interesting.
So this is where it all came from.
Yeah.
And people said, fine. I mean, if you want to work with Taiwan, you work with Taiwan. But do not, open a Pandora box and send our people to China for trial. Because mainland China is still a place where you cannot trust to send anybody there for trial.
Right.
Simple.
Right.
And so that, of course, the Democrats want the government because it's wrong, because we cannot fully trust the mainland government. And not only us, because we are the usual suspects. The business sector voiced out, said, look, if you start doing that, it might harm our interests, because our people might travel to Hong Kong and that person might be subject to extradition.
Right.
It's like the Zhou incident in Canada. People do not want to risk sending their employees here to Hong Kong, and it might harm Hong Kong's reputation. International community start to voice up, including the EU, the Canadian government, British government, of course, the American government, etc.
Right.
And so people start, oh, look, it's not something that we should ignore anymore. The ordinary citizens start to pay attention to what's happening. And at the very beginning, we're talking about maybe 10 or 20,000 people having a protest against the bill. That was early this year. And by April, we are talking about hundreds of thousands of people took to the street. Is a clear sign that people start paying attention to it. And Carrie Lam start thinking, I don't care. And that's why when in June, it was a scheduled time for the government to resume second reading here at the Legislative Council. That was supposed to be on the 12th of June.
Right.
And so the weekend before that, on the 9th of June, Hong Kong people said, look, this is our last chance to tell this government, stop doing something so stupid and silly. So that's why millions of Hong Kong people took to the streets in a peaceful way. That's the first time we had over 1 million people taking to the street since 1989.
Right.
Carrie Lam, at night, around 11 o'clock, she issued a statement. She said, I fully respect these people, but we'll continue doing what we're supposed to do on Wednesday.
Right.
And so imagine if you were one of these people, and never forget, Hong Kong only has slightly more than 7 million people.
Right.
And if 1 out of every 7 Hong Kong citizens took to the street, you could imagine the scale of anger.
Right. And of course, the many more people that actually probably supported this approach anyway.
And so when Carrie Lam said, "No, I don't care what you're doing. I'll still continue doing what I want to do," that triggered thousands and thousands of people on the 12th of June. They took to the streets, not a march, but they surrounded here the legislature, the building, and blocked all the ways, the major roads,
Right.
the highways, etc., because there were so many people. And so the government, the pro-Beijing legislators, they were not able to get into the building and resume second reading.
Yes.
And in the afternoon on the day, police start shooting rubber bullets to the people. And tear gas, of course.
Yes, yes.
And we were angry because what the heck was going on? I mean, why did you have to do it?
And I heard from a number of people, like nobody was expecting that kind of response to
not
the
at
crowd
all.
at this time.
No, not at all.
Right.
Back then in June, in mid-June, people were largely very peaceful. They did not do any they did not take any extreme measure to provoke the police.
Right.
But still, they were met by this tear gas, huge number of tear gas and rubber bullets. And in fact, one teacher in his 20s was shot in the eye, I think the right eye, and so causing permanent damage to his eye
Right.
and vision. So that's really the beginning of everything. And of course, a few days later, that was the 15th of June, Carrie Lam spoke to Hong Kong people and said, "I'm going to postpone the legislation."
Yes.
And when people were expecting not a complete withdrawal. So, when she said postponing, people cannot trust her because you can always come back to Electoral
Right.
with your majority. And so on the day after, that's the 16th of June, double the number. 2 million Hong Kong people took to the streets in a peaceful way to express our anger, to express the fact that, look, we are not happy with how you handled the students on the 12th of June. We are not happy that you fired tear gas and rubber bullets to Hong Kong people. We are not your enemies. We are not at war. Well, at least we were not. And how on earth, how dare you shooting this, you claim it's less lethal, but we say, you could cause someone very serious injuries.
Right.
And so that's where the 5 demands came from.
Okay.
So on the 16th of June, double the number took to the street. More than 2 million people expressed their anger, and especially their dissatisfaction with Carrie Lam.
Right.
Both from what happened on the 12th, that is shooting rubber bullets to the students, and also the fact that she postponed, but not not withdrawing the bill. So that's where the 5 demands came from. The first one is to formally withdraw the bill, which
Right.
took Carrie Lam a few months to formally withdrawing it.
Yes.
She did it in September, but that's, too late.
Things have already escalated quite a bit by that point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Number two, Carrie Lam labeled what happened on the 12th of June, the students as rioters and rioting. And we demand her to withdraw this labeling.
And the reason is that, rioting you could get 10 years in prison for this. It's just a
Maximum.
very, very serious charge as opposed to a peaceful gathering.
Is unfair, is premature, and in fact is just wrong to label students and young men and women for participating in a riot.
Right.
Number three is to set up a commission of inquiry to look into police misconduct. Back in mid-June, we were focusing on what happened on the 12th of June.
Right.
And it was supposed to be a legitimate, reasonable demand. I mean, if the police had done something too much, then you set up an independent commission of inquiry to look into their misconduct. Simple as that. But Carrie Lam refused to do so. And of course, that's another problem. That lays the foundation for further chaos and mistrust. Number four is to stop prosecuting anybody who participated in the movement. Back then, we were referring to the 12th of June
Yeah.
and a few incidents on the 9th. But right now, we still expect that any reasonable government should stop prosecuting these people who were participating in the movement in general over the past 6 months.
Yeah.
And the 5th, back then, people demand Carrie Lam to step down, but they shortly afterwards they switch it to universal suffrage.
Okay.
I mean, that is the ultimate issue of Hong Kong. For the background of the audience, right now we cannot choose a chief executive. The chief executive is chosen by a committee called Election Commission
Okay.
of 1,200 people.
Okay.
And the legislature, I've already explained.
Yes.
Not the full legislature,
Yes.
just half of it, or slightly more than half, are chosen by the general public.
Okay.
And we say, look, we need democracy, we need universal suffrage to choose the head of government and the legislature. And are we asking for the moon? No. This was promised, the way to have democracy and universal suffrage to choose our government and legislature were written so clearly in the basic law. That
Right.
is the mini constitution of Hong Kong. And it was the Chinese government, Beijing, denied giving us or fulfilling this promise as stated so clearly in the basic law. And imagine Hong Kong, an international financial center, people are so sophisticated. I mean, we deserve universal suffrage. And this is squarely within the spirit of one country, two systems.
Right.
We are not demanding something that we do not deserve in the first place. We are not asking for something that Beijing never promised. We are asking Beijing to say, look, this is like a contract between Hong Kong people and Beijing in the first place. And you said we would have universal suffrage 10 years after the handover. Now it's 22 years after.
Right.
So can we have universal suffrage? Simple. And why are we so eager to have democracy? It's check and balance. I mean, with somebody who were chosen by the people sitting in the government, that person would not do something so silly, so unreasonable like the extradition bill.
It would feel accountable.
Accountable to
Right.
the people.
So, and this is actually also interesting, and there's some people out there who don't get this. This isn't a separatist movement,
No.
right? Yeah.
In Hong Kong, we fully understand that we are simply asking for Beijing government to fulfill their promises under the Basic Law and Joint Declaration. That is the Sino-British Joint Declaration signed in 1984. And that declaration is the foundation of the Basic Law, which governs Hong Kong and gives Hong Kong high degree of autonomy.
Right.
Again, I mean, as a member of the opposition, I can say our party is not demanding for separating ourselves from the Chinese government. We are simply saying that under one country, two system, we deserve to have a government that is chosen by Hong Kong people, that is accountable to Hong Kong people, and that can really run our own show, as stated so clearly in the Basic Law. The Hong Kong government is responsible for domestic affairs. By what we mean domestic affairs, we understand that foreign affairs, okay, it's up to you, it's up to Beijing. The national defense is up to Beijing, but everything beyond that should be regarded as domestic issues.
I see. So you see yourself as a Chinese?
Yeah, I'm a Chinese, but I'm a Hong Kong citizen. I'm a Hong Konger.
Right.
I grew up learning Chinese culture, learning Chinese history, but I was born here in Hong Kong. I grew up in Hong Kong, although I spent a good number of years in Canada, but then I treat Hong Kong as my home and my only home. And so I am just like any other ordinary citizen here in Hong Kong. We love this place. We want this place to stay the way it used to be.
So, as having someone that having spent so much time in Canada, and you were even Canadian for a number of years, but I understand from what I've learned that you can't also be Canadian and then run for office here.
Which is fair.
Yeah, which is fair. So you're no longer Canadian. But what do you think about the Canadian government's response to this whole situation?
We understand that some members of parliament, they have spoken. In the past 6 months, Canadian government, the foreign affairs, they've issued some statements in support of Hong Kong. We understand that some politicians are pushing the government to be even more supportive to Hong Kong. I mean, every country is, they manage their own affairs.
Right.
And we understand that.
Right.
When it comes to foreign affairs, they have their own consideration. But when they're still considering our comments, or what we want to say is, look, it's not really about Hong Kong. When it comes to Hong Kong affairs, it's not about Hong Kong only. It doesn't concern 7 million people only.
Okay.
Hong Kong is at the forefront against this authoritarian state.
Okay.
We are fighting this ideology campaign against the authoritarian. That is, of course, the communists. And we have been practicing liberal democracies for over 1.5 centuries. Hong Kong is free, is partially democratic. We have the rule of law. We share the values that most of the major liberal democracies share. And so we need the attention and continuous support from the rest of the world, not only from the governments, but also from the people. We need them to understand that we are not fighting our own fight. We are fighting a fight that belongs to all those around the world who share the same values. That is the ingredients and elements, as I mentioned. So we cannot fight this fight alone.
Okay.
And Hong Kong people appreciate the fact that we know there are supports from around the world, and we understand that we are not an island. We are doing this with the support from our friends around the world.
What would it mean to the rest of the world, in your view, if, I don't know, if Hong Kong lost its autonomy?
Hong Kong, under one country, two systems, we keep the capitalist way of life. That is transparency of basically the government, financial market, etc.
Some people have told me that this is one of the few places where there's actually a free market.
Well,
Right.
yeah, the Heritage Foundation always ranked Hong Kong as the freest economy in the
Right.
world. Whether that is the best thing, we can discuss further.
Okay.
But still, for Hong Kong, that has been practicing this capitalism way of doing things, liberal democracies. One country, two systems, if that was genuinely implemented, could really preserve this. Because by what I mean one country, two systems, which allows two systems living side by side. I mean, we are not trying to push the liberal democracy's values to China. It's entirely up to them. And if they can respect what we're doing right now here within the Hong Kong territory, I mean, that's all right. And if Hong Kong start losing liberal democracies, if Hong Kong start losing, say, freedom, that is to say, the communist way of life prevail. And rather the rest of the world, especially those who share the same values as we do they want to see this? Is it a good sign? I don't think so. So this is why we say we need the support and continuous attention from friends around the world.
Do you think Beijing might be worried about, Hong Kong's spirit kind of being infectious, so to speak, into the mainland?
If they are confident that their governance is up to the standard, if they are confident that people in China are happy with their life, then why should they worry, right? If it's the Hong Kong people who are not happy with one country two system or the way it is functioning, that they should be worried about. And
Right.
I mean, instead of having this fear and worried, the best thing to do is to respond to people's demands. The best thing to do is to solve the problems on the ground. I mean, you do not contain people's voices and say, I mean, don't come over, don't influence our people. Instead, you should look into the eye of Hong Kong people and say, I understand what's wrong, I'll do what I have to do. And that would resolve all the problems.
Oh, interesting answer. Listen, so we were kind of looking into your history a little bit before
Right.
doing this interview, and I understand you were at Peking University
Correct.
at the time when the SARS epidemic actually happened, years and years ago now, and you kind of watched it happen.
Yep.
And can you just sort of speak to what your experience of that was?
I was after my Canadian education, I was curious about what's happening in China. And so I went to Peking Uni for law, to study law. It was 2002.
Right.
And shortly after my arrival in early 2003, there came the SARS.
Yes, that's right.
And
So I'll tell you what, we reported on the fact that there was SARS in China weeks and weeks before the government admitted to it. It was a terrible situation. It's something I remember very distinctly.
you were
That's
there
why I
as
want to
well?
ask. I wasn't there, but I was watching.
I see.
Yeah.
I was on campus on a daily basis in late February, early June, I think, or late January, but okay. In springtime, 2003, when basically nobody talks about anything in Beijing, everybody was living their own life and happily. I received calls from my mother, who was in Hong Kong back then,
Okay.
on a daily basis, telling me that, look, son, something really wrong is going on.
Okay.
Something called SARS, and it has already spread to Beijing. You should watch out. And I said, no, there's nothing really going on here. Nobody talks about it. Nobody gave us any warning, etc. And she said, look, son, I don't care. I'm going to send you some mask so that you could protect yourself. And so a few days later, I received something called N95, the mask, so to cover your face and to make sure that you are all right. And so I shared that with my roommate, a guy from Taiwan, and we were walking on campus with the mask. And people look at us and
Wondering
thought,
what you were doing.
what the heck you were doing, and like two
Right.
monsters walking around. And I still remember this incident. I was walking on my way to law school and with my mask. And the secretary, who was at the law school, when I walked into the office, and she looked up and said, Alvin, what the hell are you doing? What the heck is that? The mask. I said, look, there are rumors saying that there's SARS going on, so I need a mask to protect myself. And she said, she was reading a newspaper. She held up and said, no worries. The government said it's all right. There's no such thing. Look.
Fascinating.
And I was like, all right, should I trust you or your paper or my mom and the Hong Kong media? That's what I asked myself. And shortly afterwards, people start knowing that, okay, there's SARS already spread in China, and schools was canceled. We no longer have lessons because we do not want to have any interaction with people.
Right.
And there were queues around different restaurants because they were handing out some Chinese medicine. They had rumors saying that the local medicine could cure or prevent you from having SARS, things like that. And there were rumors on SMS saying that, somebody has died because of this, because of SARS,
Right.
at which residence, student dormitories, etc. And I thought to myself, hang on, I mean, this is not the way you treat your people. You should not allow people sharing rumors. You should not allow people living under fear because of lack of information, because of lack of transparency. If in the Canadian way of life or governance, the government would disclose everything and to give you proper instructions so that you would not, panic.
Right.
And I look at Hong Kong, I mean, it was not good, it was very bad rather, but still the government would have to disclose things instead of telling lies.
Right.
So that was really shocking to me.
Yeah. It's interesting. And this is the other thing. So was it some experiences like this that prompted you to want to get into Hong Kong politics in the first place, or?
It was in 2003, shortly after SARS, the Hong Kong government introduced the National Security Bill.
Right.
And with the so-called Article 23 legislation.
Yeah.
And it was the first time to my life that, hey, the rule of law in Hong Kong could be very fragile. The way of life of Hong Kong could be gone easily.
And you were actually still at Peking University at the time?
I was still at Peking, and I was in Toronto for a while because of the situation in Beijing.
I see.
And I was like watching news, reading all these news articles on a daily basis very closely. And I thought, oh, hold on, this is not right. And this could harm Hong Kong.
Right. And that was sort of the Article 23, 2003. That was the kind of the first really large scale protests, demonstrations in Hong Kong.
That was the first time since the handover, Hong Kong had over 500,000 of people took to the streets. I mean, the last time before that was 1989, Tiananmen Square. And so it was the spirit that really, wow, to me, I was like, this is what, this is my home. This is where we should do something about. And so that's the beginning of everything.
So let's fast forward a bit back to the present day. You mentioned how, foreign support is valuable to the Hong Kong people. So there's this, of course, the recent passage of the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act and another act. What do you think the significance of that is for going forward?
That is a very important signal to Hong Kong people that, look, it's not merely about words, but actions, that friends around the world are start doing something in their own capacity to tell Hong Kong people that we are with you. And Hong Kong as an international financial center is not a self-claimed IFC. It has to be recognized by the rest of the world. And if international players do not recognize Hong Kong as free and international, they will not come to Hong Kong for investment. And so, legislations like the one you've just mentioned is more than gesture, but action from different governments to say that, we want to ensure that Hong Kong would stay free the way it was so that it could continue to stay as a genuine IFC, so we will stay, we'll still come to invest.
Gotcha. So where do you see things going now for you and for Hong Kong to finish up?
Well, it's not really up to me. It's not really up to the general public. If you're referring to the movement, the ball is in the court of Carrie Lam. It's up to her. It's up to her masters how to handle the Hong Kong people's demands. We are not demanding something that we do not deserve. And we are not changing. Like, we are not being flip-flops. Our demands are so clear, written on the wall. It's entirely up to her how to respond directly and positively to the Hong Kong people. And, Hong Kong people are very determined, We can see that the huge turnout rate in the last election 2 weeks ago.
Right.
We can see that Hong Kong people are still extremely determined even after the landslide, because we know winning seats in the election is not the end of the movement. It's just a new chapter. And we will stay determined and passionate about what we demanded for.
Alvin Yeung, such a pleasure to have you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.